I'm not going to hold you. Her bio is in the program. So if you go to the program, I'm going to let Sabrina tell you about herself. She is as she said, the co-producer and editor of this film. We're going to start with a series of questions, and then I'm going to open this up to you. So welcome, Sabrina.
Hi, everyone. Hi, thank you for coming.
So, Sabrina, first, how did you become motivated to get involved in this film on Sonia Sanchez?
Well, I mean, that was very easy. I was working on another project with a pair of documentary filmmakers in Philadelphia, where Sonia lives and was poet laureate, and we were finishing up another film, and they said that they wanted to possibly do a film about Sonia Sanchez, and they asked me, like, do you know who she is? And I'm like, of course I know who she is. And it was just like a no-brainer for me. Of course I wanted to be part of telling the story of, hopefully a definitive account of this great woman's story. And so, I mean, for me, my introduction to Sonia was as I discovered one of her books on a library shelf at school when I was like in 7th grade or something. And I remember being really kind of shocked by what I was reading. It was really a bit of a revelation for me, because I was just so surprised to hear, to be reading rather, something that really spoke to a lot of the things that I had begun to think about as a adolescent, and being kind of like more aware of the world around me, and thinking about race and gender and all of those different kinds of things. And then in a woman's voice that was so powerful and so direct and so bold. It just was really, it was really like an epiphany for me. And so that was my introduction to Sonia. And so when I was offered the opportunity to help actually even shape the telling of that story, there was like no question that I would be part of it.
I just find it interesting that you would have been introduced to Sonia as an adolescent. What kind of school did you go to?
I went to a parochial school in Brooklyn. I don't even think it exists anymore, but it was a parochial Lutheran school, and I don't even know if they knew it was on that shelf. But I remember it was just like we would have a free period where you can like pick books or do your homework or do whatever, and I just came across. It was actually an anthology, and one of her poems was in it. I wish I could remember exactly which one. I think it might have been from Homegirls and Hand Grenades. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's how
that's amazing.
I just stumbled on it.
Yeah, when I went to school, we didn't have any black writers. I didn't get introduced to black writers until I went to college.
It wasn't really part of like our curriculum, but it was
but
on the shelf.
At least it was on the shelf.
Yeah,
we didn't even have that. So this Bad Sonia is a film that really, I would say, has value for today. Do you want to comment on that? What value does this film have today in 2018?
Well, I think it does a couple things. I mean, one of the things that it kind of reminds us is that, the quest and the fight for justice doesn't like ever end. It's not as if like you accomplish something and then now we can all like, as Dr. Bracy says, go home and go to sleep. Like it's something that you have to constantly keep active and present, because things, it's never like a done deal. Your issues around justice and human rights and everything are constantly being challenged and assaulted, as we can see, since our last election. If it wasn't clear even before that, it's really a very stark sort of virulent reminder of that. And I think too, her life, the way she lived her life, the sacrifices that she made in her life also remind you, like, this is what it looks like to dedicate yourself to fighting for justice for all people. It's not easy, and I think there's a way in which we think that maybe it's kind of like seamless for people like Sonia to just wake up and do this, but it really cost her. It cost her a lot. I mean, you see that someone said something about how she got banned from New York City. She talks about having to move all over the country with her children. She talks about figuring out how to protect her children. So it's, a reminder that, it's, if you want to like do this work, that it's really a choice, and it's really about loving people, and it's really about, you know, really dedicating yourself to that, like, all the time. She walks the walk, like, all the time.
Right, and she's continually teaching. And you have an opportunity to hear Sonia this afternoon. She's going to be in a panel on the Black Arts Movement that starts about 3 o'clock. So just going back to the film, in editing this film, there are a lot of people. It took a number of years. How long did it take? And what were the highlights and challenges for you in doing this film?
Sure. It took us about 5 years to make the film. What was the thing that was interesting, and it also speaks to why I wanted to do it, there's a way in which Sonia is famous, but yet a lot of people don't know who she is, if that makes any sense. Because there will be times where I might mention Sonia Sanchez, and people that I don't expect to know who she is do know who she is. And I remember one time I was talking to an English teacher, and he had never heard of her. So that was also another thing that was really important to me about, like, telling this story. And I think that speaks a little bit to the challenges of making the film and why it took us so long, because on one hand, people were really excited about the idea that we were telling the story, but it was very difficult, frankly, to get the funding to tell the story. So we got funding from a lot of very prestigious grants. We got money from the NEA and from the Sundance Institute and many other funders, but it was never quite enough to make, like, a really full commitment to get the film made. So it took us some time. In terms of the challenges of making the film, that kind of speaks to it too, sort of like, how do I tell a story about her where you learn some, for those of you who know who she is and know her story, and also she's been on a lot of television programs, she's interviewed a lot to talk about the civil rights movement and the Black arts movement. So how do I tell a story that is still new and fresh and revealing for folks who may already know who she is, and also to put her in context and really do her work justice for those who don't know who she is. And I think, you know, one of the choices, you know, I co-directed, and I was also the editor of the film, so I thought a lot about how do I tell this story without it feeling like just a litany of, like, she did this, and then she did this, and then she did, like, it just feels like sort of like a recounting of her resume. How do I actually really create a narrative that engages you and keeps you, and it also, like, disrupts, like, the chronology a little bit. And there were a couple things that I think we decided as a team to do. One of them is the poetry, having other people read her poetry. By having other people read her poetry, instead of being totally wedded to the chronology, which is essentially a chronological film, I could actually, in terms of structuring the story, I could sort of, like, go in and out of parts of her life through the poetry. So that kind of freed me a little bit and allowed a little bit of creativity so that I can, you know, there could be a poem and that can take me to a story about her children, or it could take me to a story about her teaching or something like that. So it was a little bit like I was able to create a little drama through the art. And I think the other thing that, for me personally, what I thought was really important is that even though she's a poet and a playwright, you know, she's a writer, I feel like people think about her a lot in terms of her social justice work. And because we had that material of her, like, the film opens with her writing. And I felt like, well, this is something that you never really get to see. You never get to see an artist sort of, like, in process. I feel like, at least I've never seen that with Sonia. So I thought that would be a way to introduce her, not so much to start talking directly about activism, but to, like, get to be in the inner workings of her mind, the way she, like, talks to herself while she's writing, you know, the way she, she, like, makes those weird noises and everything, like, while she's writing. It's like whoever gets to see, like, the actual process of an artist, like, in action. So I felt like opening the film that way, establishes her first and foremost as an artist and as a writer, and it was like sort of an entry into a side of her and of her work that you probably haven't seen before. So that's kind of like how I thought about it.
So this film, was nominated for an Emmy, and you are an award-winning documentary filmmaker yourself, and teaching and journalism. Just first of all, like to know what the response has been to the film. How did it feel having the film be nominated as an Emmy? And just share with us what work you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been making documentary films for, you know, a while now, and I work, I have the good fortune to be able to work in many different roles. I'm a producer and editor mostly on documentary film, and I think this film is sort of like part of the continuum of the work that I'm interested in. I got into documentary film not because I went to film school, actually. I didn't actually study film in school. I was a chemistry major. I thought I was going to have a very different life and go to medical school and stuff like that. But then I took a required philosophy class, which really changed the way I thought about my education and just opened my mind up to just ideas and the intersection of politics and philosophy and religion and all of these different things. And that sort of led me to an interest in social justice. And I had no idea where do you get a job doing social justice? I didn't really know. I actually stumbled on an internship with Bill Moyers, who was doing a piece about a case that the Southern Poverty Law Center had taken on, and that was sort of like the epiphany for me that I could merge storytelling and social justice. So that's sort of how I sort of came into this and figured my way around in an industry that probably, had I known how difficult it would be, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I didn't know what I didn't know, so I just decided to pursue it. And so most of the work I do has a social justice theme, and tends to have social justice and certainly around art and gender. So the first feature film that I produced and edited premiered at Sundance, and it was called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And many of you are probably familiar with the film. So that was my first film. And it's about the construction of masculinity being looked at through the lens of hip hop. And so most of my work kind of sort of fits in that kind of, context. And most recently, I made a film called Quest. It's having a theatrical run right now. It premiered at Sundance last year. And it's interesting, because I just brought up Beyond Beats and Rhymes. It's a story of a family living in North Philadelphia. I don't know what it is about Philadelphia. It's like my third Philadelphia film. And I'm from Brooklyn. I don't know. But that's just been, calling me. So it's a story about a family in North Philadelphia over the course of almost 10 years. So we begin the film with the first election of Barack Obama through to the 2016 election. And we see, and it's a drama about a family, but you see about how all of these different issues that our country is confronted with intersect in their lives. And one of the things that the protagonist of the film does, Quest, in the absence of resources and support for young people in the community, he opens up his home. He's a music producer, and so he has a hip-hop studio in his basement, and that becomes a place for mentorship and creativity and safety and love, in his home. And so again, it's a very different entry point into these issues, but it's again kind of consistent with the themes of my work. And it's won a lot of awards on the festival circuit, and we're doing a theatrical run now, and it's going to be actually on POV. It's going to be on public television, on PBS's POV series. It's going to be actually the opening of the series on Father's Day, which is pretty significant because, again, the themes of masculinity and fatherhood and manhood is very prominent in the film, and that's when the film is opening. So.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to now open this up to you. We want to hear if you have questions, comments for Sabrina or me. Yes, why don't you can step to the mic. There's a mic on either side of the stage, so please step to the mic so we can definitely hear. And while we're stepping, we have Bakari Kitakwana in the audience. He's going to be on a panel on literary activism in the age of Trump this afternoon, so I encourage you to stay for that. Okay.
So Sabrina, I want to thank you for your work. Dr. Terry Trent from Phoenix by way of West Philly. So I
Philly
really
in the house
appreciate,
again, huh?
Yeah. So I really appreciate the perspective because for me growing up, Sonia was so much a part of the fabric of being a Philadelphian, and this was new for me. I didn't know as much about her journey and her roots here in New York. So it was fabulous. Thank you for that. And I've had the pleasure of, through the years, being in her company and just soaking in her aura. So this was a new perspective. I also want to suggest that it's not just a story of activism, but it's also a story of resilience. I am a resilience researcher, and I look at those ingredients that make some of us thrive, where some of us literally dry up, like the raisin in the sun. And so I appreciate what she offered this new generation about what thriving means, and the evolution of her from being an angry Black woman to being a vessel of peace. So thank you, sister.
Well, thank you so much as well. And I think you're absolutely right, because you see the ways in which throughout the film, like, folks keep trying to shut her down. She couldn't teach in New York for a period of time, but she did what she had to do to keep doing the work that she doesn't, keep her commitment to her life's mission. And one of the things I remember she told me, this is like after the film was done, someone had asked her, why did you agree to be in the film? And this was the first time that she had ever said this. And she said that she wanted to tell her story for all of the other women who can't tell their story. Because there are a lot of women who were part of the struggle, who were who were working alongside Sonia, who didn't have the same outcome, who can't tell their story, who were really I don't want to make them, I don't want to quite say beaten down by the system, but there's ways in which they weren't able to sort of recover and create a life the way that Sonia has been able to. So that's really important, again, to understand that there's resilience, there's commitment, and there's sacrifice to this work. And she made a great sacrifice for us, of her own life.
Yes, thank you.
I want to commend you on a very beautiful, poignant film. I saw the film 3 times. However, I didn't see it today. And so I'm coming into the conversation somewhat cold, if you might say, literally and figuratively. But one thing that really struck me from seeing the film was her shopping in Philly. That really grabbed me. I remember, if you think of great artists, you think of Duke Ellington or Coltrane. The ordinary, mundane things that they do are oftentimes left out, and they're like superheroes that they don't shop, and they don't they don't ever take time to sleep, And so it was really beautiful to see her shopping and the care that she took in her shopping, and that's probably a lesson for many of us. And I wanted to ask you a question, and the question I wanted to ask you is all art begets art, and what films influenced you? What films moved you in your filmmaking process? And that's my final.
Wow, that's gosh, I should be ready to have an answer for a list of films or something like that. But I don't know. I off the top of my head, I can't think of any one particular film. It's just an overall sort of impact that films have had on me, and about the power they have to actually make change. I just came back from a retreat. I was asked to be a mentor for some young filmmakers that just received a grant. And one person said, well, I know that films can't really change the world. And I feel well, that's kind of not really true. I mean, by themselves, maybe not. It's not in a very literal sort of you make a film and then everything's fine. But films have a way of reaching people in a way that, debates and esoteric conversations about issues just simply cannot. There's a way in which that stories don't just educate you or inform you, but they also move you. It's not just intellectual, it's visceral, it's emotional. And I think that's really powerful, because that's what drives people to say, I want to make a difference in the world. And that's why one of the things that I do with my work, it's not just about making the film, but the film has doesn't reach its full potential unless we have sort of an engagement and impact life after it. It's like, how are we leveraging the film as a tool for social justice? How are we so it's really about, for me, developing partnerships with activists and organizations who are already doing work on the ground, addressing a range of issues, and saying, here's my film, let's talk about how you can use my film in your work to bring more people to it, to maybe amplify a goal or something like that. Like, how can you use this film in your work? So for me, that's kind of like how film has sort of that's the lesson that film has really taught me.
I'm going to ask to keep, because of the time constraints, to zero in on the question, and if we can.
I'll try to be more succinct.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to be discreet.
Good afternoon. My name is Colnise Hinton, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for the way that the film was developed. And can I just say 3 things that I loved about it? Okay. I loved so much about it, the choices that were made, like in terms of showing Sonia Sanchez as a young woman and her aging process, and just, the impact it had on her family, seeing her placed in her community, as this brother already mentioned. The call to action at the end was powerful, so your comments about how this film will live on, it'll live on in me or through me, hopefully. Just the call to action that no matter how old we get, we still have to stay on the battlefield. So I just salute you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Your comments actually remind me of one of the questions Brenda just asked that I didn't answer, which is about the Emmy nomination. One of the things that I really loved about that is that it was sort of like a cultural and sort of like mainstream cultural recognition of her. Whether or not we won, we didn't win. I lost actually to a friend, which was okay. But the fact that the film was nominated for an Emmy, I thought was very important and very significant, because it's about recognizing the power of her story and also her legacy and her importance in American cultural life. And one of the things I thought was cool too is that Sonia would always say, like, for her generation and other poets and activists, like, it was never about like recognition and accolades, but she was actually really giddy and excited about the Emmys, and she was very excited about coming to the Emmys, and she's like, should I tell people? I'm like, Sonia, tell everybody. So that was really nice that this film was able to give her that gift, because she's given so much. And even though that was like a small thing, but it was just so nice to see her excited and happy and really joyful about, that journey.
Thank you.
I see you at every screening, by the way. Anyway.
Well, in the midst of the Black Arts Movement, Sonia became my elder sister, my big sister, when I was part of a poetry workshop that she held at County Cullen. And you've done my girl proud. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, can you just speak, particularly for the young people? I developed my career in television, and people always say, how do I get started? And my answer has always been, get a liberal arts degree and then move forward. Can you just speak to how you used, a very different kind of education and moved into activism? Can you speak more to that and how that served you?
Sure. I mean, I think it's very interestingly that my work, like becoming a philosophy major, and frankly, even my previous life when I was like very STEM-centered in chemistry and math and all of that, especially as an editor, it kind of like merged the work that I do actually merged the two in a certain way, because part of making a documentary film, because you're using stories to elevate larger issues, you have to figure out how do you sort of bring those in, build a thesis essentially to make the case, to make the points that you're trying to make. And there's a way, and then, so there's that part of it, and then also from an artistic perspective, you want to be creative. I was also like a writing minor. I wrote fiction and nonfiction, so I used that to sort of help me figure out how do you tell a good story? When do I reveal what when? And I didn't learn that in film school. I learned that like writing and reading, you know? And finally, even like from a technical standpoint, editing is part like, it's kind of like sculpting, it's very artistic, and some of it is very technical, it's like math, you know? Like I'm figuring out like, how long should this be? What is the pacing, you know, of this? And if I can't figure out something in a scene, sometimes that's my entry point to it. I said, well, what's the sort of like math of this moment here? Like, and I kind of find my way that way. So, you know, I don't discourage anyone from like going to film school or anything like that, and I actually teach documentary filmmaking to graduate students, to journalism students, but I do find, I think, this is just my opinion, that I think as an undergrad, you should read and write and be a liberal arts, you know, student and learn about the world and learn about world thought and look at how the philosophy of a given time influences the art and the politics and the science and all of those different things. So you really have an understanding of the world. I think one of the most, like, somewhat, I don't want to say disappointing, but I remember I taught briefly undergrads who were, like, you know, communications majors or something, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it didn't seem to be supplemented with a liberal arts component, and they had a lot of difficulty expressing themselves and writing. And part of documentary filmmaking, you're writing proposals, basically writing papers like all the time. And you're at a disadvantage if you can't do that. So that's what I would say was the benefit for me.
Thank you. Oh, that is perfect for our English majors. They can hear how you can really take that degree and take it in many directions. So and the importance of editing and revising.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, you want to make a last question?
Yes. Sabrina, the last time I think we saw each other, we were at a fundraising event for your new film.
Request, yeah.
I'm curious if you can talk some about the financial challenges. I can remember at one point, before you guys finished the film on Sonia, me and Sonia, I've spent a lot of time with Sonia for much of the last 30 years, and we were traveling together, and she was talking to me about, you know, the struggle to raise money to get the film finished. And I just remember thinking, you know, this is Sonia Sanchez. We shouldn't be struggling to get a film made about Sonia Sanchez. Yeah. But can you just talk some about the financial challenges and the time that it takes to raise money for a film like this?
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
and comparatively to the new film.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this is an ongoing conversation. And not just about raising money for films, but even like sustainability for filmmakers. Because while you're trying to raise money, you know, you have to live. You need to make a living. That's why a lot of us, that's usually our entry point into teaching, you know, for example. And you know, trying to juggle multiple projects at once to try to like make ends meet. And I think ultimately that speaks a lot to the priorities of our culture, that like we just don't value this kind of work in the same way that we might value others. And I think even when we raised, like with Quest, we were able to raise a lot of money, but we didn't raise everything that we needed, you know? I'm still working on the project. I'm still working on the engagement, for example. I'm raising money for that, and that was the event that we saw each other at. But while I'm raising money and I'm writing this paper, I have like no, you know, I have no grant to, and that's work, but like I don't have a grant that's like sustaining me, so I edit other things and I teach and I do all these other things. So I think that is, you know, I wish I had like a solution to it or something, but that is definitely a challenge, and I think that's why it's really important that you maybe have multiple skills so that you can sustain yourself in one way while you're working. And that's the freedom that I have, because not everyone does. Some people are just producers, some people are just directors, some people are just editors. Because I'm able to do multiple things, I can kind of hustle and get things done and work on great projects all at the same time. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. It's a continuing conversation about sustainability and raising money. And again, like it's Sonia Sanchez, it should have been easy. I thought it was going to be easy, but people loved it, but then their love for it didn't seem to translate into like writing a check for it. Right. So,
like you said, that's the challenge of the artists, and that's the challenge of those who are doing the things that they're passionate about. I don't think you can, people realize you can't go and get one job. You have to find out what you're passionate about and find other ways to do what you want and think outside of the box. And that's the life of the literary activists also, right? Okay. So thank you so much. Let's give Sabrina a round hand. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you. Remember, I think the next session, you're going to...
Yes.
The next session starts at 12:45.
Yep.
Literary activism in the age of Obama.
Yes.
Okay, so...
The car kid one is here, then Gloria Brown Marshall will be also joining him.
Right. And I encourage you to go out to our bookstore and also support our vendors. Writers have a challenging life. Please support them. They're vendors, and our bookstore is there. We have all of the writers. I see there's some faculty in the audience. See Professor Leathers? Is that Professor? Yeah, Professor Leathers. Thank you for coming out. Just want to thank all of our students and faculty for coming out. Also, thank you.
There's a coffee shop out there too. Get some coffee, wake up a little bit, get your blood going again. But thank you again. And again, we'll be right back here very shortly at 12:40, okay? I think I locked that room up.
Close it, man.